Hello, Musical Notes here. We make the notes, you make the music. In this review movie, we're going to look at something called Trackspacer. It's a plugin that is going to save you an incredible amount of time. And no doubt you're now thinking, well, if it's going to save me a lot of time, it's going to be really expensive. Well, that's another good thing about this particular plugin. It really is great value for money. First of all, to explain what the plugin does, I think the best thing to do is play a part of this song and I'll talk you through an issue between the two tracks, this vocal recording and the accompaniment piano. Inevitably, because we've got these two tracks, the vocal and the piano, we do get a clashing crossover frequency area, whereby the dominant frequencies for the vocal collide with the accompaniment piano. What we could do, of course, is simply EQ those frequencies away by carving out those particular frequencies. However, we do know the problem with this. If we do start carving away too many frequencies, then the result will be that the piano sounds quite thin. What we could do with, and you know where I'm leading with this, but what we could do with is a plugin that automatically attenuates those colliding crossover frequencies, but only whilst the vocal is in place. When there is no vocal, we would want those carved away piano frequencies to reappear so that a richer, more fuller sound gets heard, and of course this makes the piano sound more natural. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the beginning of this track. It's very basic, as I say, it's just a vocal, in fact it's a dry vocal, with its accompaniment piano. Here we go.
Saw the cover on a magazine, looked in the eyes of a girl there in a silent scream.
Okay, now to be fair, left like this with these two tracks, if this song was just these two tracks in isolation, then we would probably get away with that. There isn't really that much of a problem. However, this particular plugin, Trackspacer, I find much more useful when implemented within a full mix, so that it can attenuate any crossover frequencies, resulting in you get a much more powerful mix. Now, you don't have to do this next step to be able to use Trackspacer, but I do think it worthwhile walking through this, so that when you do implement Trackspacer, you'll get a clearer idea of which particular frequencies to attenuate. What I initially like to do is visualize the Equalizer curve in real time. And here within Cubase 7, you can do this simply by coming down to the Equalizers tab, and then here in this small graphical window, you'll see a real-time analysis as the vocal plays through, thus enabling you to see which particular frequencies are the most prominent. Now, owing to this little equalizer view, there is that drawback. It's not really all that large. However, I'll just solo our vocal track and play the beginning through, so we get an idea, roughly anyway, which particular frequencies are the most prominent. I'll hit play.
Saw the cover on a magazine.
Okay, so as we saw, the main frequencies are within the mid-range. No surprises there, seeing as it is a vocal. Now, the only problem with that small EQ display is exactly that, it's too small. So what I suggest is grab yourself a copy of Blue Cat Audio Spectrum Analyzer plugin, it's free, and use that as an insert, and this way you'll get a much larger footprint on the screen with much more detail. So that's what I'll do, I'll just come down to insert once more, and I'll run down to Blue Cat Audio, and then choose the relevant plugin. Right, I'll double click here to open it up, and as you can see, we now have much more detail with this Blue Cat plugin. I'll play our vocal once more, and then now you'll be able to see in much more detail which particular frequencies we need to focus on. And in actual fact, if you look at the horizontal scale across the bottom, then you'll see much more precisely which frequencies we are going to focus on. So I'll play it once more.
Saw the cover on a magazine.
Okay, so predominantly the most energy is from around about 200 Hz and across and up to around about 2K. There are more frequencies involved at the higher end, however, all I need to know is I'm going to focus in on around about 200 Hz up to about 2K. Now, as I say, this isn't entirely necessary because with the Trackspacer plugin, you can do it within the actual plugin itself. However, a possible drawback with it is the actual footprint on your screen is quite small. Anyway, that's a quick analysis of our vocal frequencies. I'll move back over to Cubase, and here on our piano track I've done the same thing. I've employed exactly the same plugin. So I'll double click this to open it. And I'll go through the same process. I'm going to play the piano this time so that I can assess which particular frequencies are the most dominant. Here we go.
Saw the cover on a magazine, looked in the eyes of a girl there in a silent scream.
Right, so we noticed there that the main frequency energy for the piano is pretty much the same as it is for the vocal, making this Trackspacer plugin that we're going to use in a moment that much more of a powerful weapon to try and combat that. Okay, so back in Cubase, this is the process. With your piano track, and this is the chosen track, that I want those particular frequencies to be attenuated when the vocal kicks in. So as I say, choosing the piano track, come over to Inserts, run down to WavesFactory, and then choose Trackspacer from within the Dynamics folder. Okay, so there it is inserted. What we need to do is call this up so we can see it and activate its sidechain input. Okay, so here it is, and here within Cubase the way this works is simple enough. I would just simply click on here, activate sidechain. Okay, so that's the first of two steps. I'll revert back to Cubase once more because my second step is to get the vocal track and send that to that sidechain input that we just set up in Trackspacer. So by coming down to Sends, I'll click on here, and then with this resulting dialog I can run down here and choose the option sidechain at the bottom. Okay, so that's done. Do make sure though that this send output is set to full. So really that's all we need to do. Two simple steps. We can now use this Trackspacer that is going on our piano, and those piano frequencies that are crossing over and colliding with our vocal are going to be attenuated only when the vocal is actually in place. So let me just call it up into view once more. Now to be fair, Trackspacer does have a deceptively simple user interface. What we're going to see in a moment in the graphical area above is, first of all, this white line. And this white line is going to be our receive channel, shall we say, i.e. the piano. And once playback starts, if this white line display dips at any point, that means that those particular frequencies have been attenuated. And remember, they are being driven by our vocal. You will also see a blue line, and the blue line will be the readout of our vocal. Now, even though I say it's got a deceptively simple user interface, there are two views. We'll start with this first view, and as you can see, predominantly it's made up of 3 dials. In the bottom left, we've got a low-pass filter, whereby we control which particular frequencies, the low frequencies, will be attenuated, i.e. from which point. The larger central rotary dial indicates as a percentage by how much you are asking the vocal to attenuate your piano. To be honest, I would prefer an option here to be able to see what this would be in terms of a dB readout. But anyway, in practice I suppose, using your ears is probably better. Over in the bottom right, we have a high-pass filter, which does the same thing as the low-pass filter, in that we get to set the top-end frequency that will be controlled. So I'll start off by choosing the frequency for my low frequencies, where I want the attenuation to take place. Now remember at the beginning of this tutorial where we used that spectrum analyzer and we determined that most of the energy at the low end was around about 200 Hz. Well, if I dial this in, and you can see the readout in the display at the top where your low pass frequency filter will start to kick in, and by using the right hand dial for our high pass filter, well of course this works in the same way. And you'll remember our top frequency area was around about 2K. So if I dial this in just above 2K and then come over to our low pass filter and take this up to around about 200 Hz, well what's that, 264 Hz, I can always fine tune this once we start playing the track. I'll set it like this as a starting point. Now just before we get started, I'm going to set the main dial here down to 0%, so it's having no effect whatsoever. And then what I'll do is I'll dial up a percentage attenuation, and whilst I do this, you'll see our white line there. Remember this represents the piano frequencies. You'll see that white line dipping between that frequency band that we've just set up. And so that you can hear this much more clearly, I'll make it actually sound that little bit artificial by dialing in far too much of a percentage attenuation. and then I'll take it back down to where I think it's about right. So let's play it back again. Here we go.
Saw the cover on a magazine. Looked in the eyes of a girl there in a silent scream. Love's promise of a future has now all gone, to be faded by fear and replace all that she holds dear. I read the headline on a magazine.
Okay, so it's as simple as that. Now, as you saw, I did make it as extreme as possible so that you could see and hear exactly what this Trackspacer is doing to our piano. Remember, driven by our vocal at those crossover frequency points. And remember, those frequency points that I created are simply a starting point. From this position, you would then tailor your sound much more appropriately so that it sounds so much more natural. Now, as I've said, there is another view, a more advanced view, that we'll get into in a further tutorial. For the moment, I'm going to leave it here now that we've seen Trackspacer in action. Okay, see you later then.